Well, hello there. Welcome to Artists for Everyone here on YouTube. And today this is a special request for a video. And someone requested that I demonstrate how I make my sort of intuitive, sort of expressive flowers. And the thing is that these flowers are not meant to be a specific flower or a real flower, but they're totally imaginary and really lovely. And would be very fun to make birthday cards or a little gift for someone. My daughter actually requested that I make some little signs for her baby shower with these flowers on them. So they can be used for many, many things, but mostly they're just super, super fun to make. And I'm going to talk about my supplies. So I have here just a piece of watercolor paper. This is actually hot press paper because I want to show you all different papers and how these react to different papers. But this is a 9x12 sheet, and it is for practicing. Okay, so this technique takes some practice. So the first thing you're going to do is just make a whole page of them to practice the technique. And then we're going to move on to our Strathmore watercolor postcards, which is a cold press finish, and we'll do one there. And then we're going to try rice paper. So I have my rice paper journal. If you don't have one, I'll leave a link for where you can get them. These are rice paper journals from Blue Heron Arts, and they're wonderful because they're double thick, and they're very inexpensive. And I use these for my watercolor meditations, but they're also perfect for a project like this. And then I also have these origami postcards, which is a rice paper. Okay, so I'm just going to show you the different kinds of paper and how they react to this technique. So I also have here, I have 3 brushes because for this technique, different sized brushes are going to give you different sized flowers. Okay, so when we want to do a smaller flower, we're going to use the pointed round, like a 000 squirrel mop, or a size 6 or 8 pointed round. And then I also have this Chinese brush that I use for my watercolor meditations, and it's just a little bit bigger, so even a bigger pointed round would be fine. Just going to give us a different kind of mark and a little bit bigger. So this would be comparable to a size 8 or 10 pointed round. And then I also have my badger brush, which is this kind of crazy, stiff, ragged brush. And this would be, these also are sold on Blue Heron Arts. They're a specialty brush, and I'll leave a link for that as well. But they're a little bit more expensive, but I use this a lot. I use it a lot for painting pine trees and really expressive landscapes where I don't want a lot of control. And if you find any kind of stiff hog hair or badger hair brush, or even a synthetic that's kind of spiky like that, that would be fine. And it's just going to give us a different effect, and it's a little bit bigger. Okay? And I also have a glass of water and some paper towels and a little dish to put pigment in if I need to, or a dinner plate would be fine. I also have a bottle of black ink. So you could use any kind of black ink. This is platinum carbon ink, and I like it very much because it is completely waterproof once it's dry. So I use this a lot for pen and ink work, for seeing drawing exercises and things like that. But any kind of black ink would be fine. Or any ink at all. It doesn't have to be black, but you'll see why I use those. And then I also have my Artists for Everyone palette from Wildthorne, and we're going to be using these colors. You could use any watercolors for this, in any color at all, but I like to use these for these projects because I love them. They're a collaboration of heart and spirit between me and my friend Kim Wildthorne, and I'll also leave a link for those. But any watercolors will be fine. So we're going to start, I'm going to start with my smaller brush. And the one thing I want to say is that when we're doing this, we have to turn our paper, okay? So I'm going to move things out of the way a little bit so I can do that. And again, this is practice, okay? These are practice. And so we're just going to make a page of them in different sizes, and so you can see how the technique works. So I've got my palette here, and I'm going to start by picking up some color. I'm going to start with a water rose, and we won't even mix the color. We'll just use water rose by itself. It's a beautiful, beautiful kind of coral red. And it's a nice juicy mix on my palette, not too strong, definitely fluid. And I want to make sure my brush is saturated with the color. And I'm going to start by putting my brush down on the paper with a point away from me. And I'm going to put it down, and I'm just going to roll the brush a little bit until it makes just a little shape like that. I'm going to pick up some more color, turn my paper a little bit, put my brush down at the end of that flower petal, and just roll it. So do you see how I'm just rolling the brush? And it gives me this sort of jagged petal edge. Okay, so I'm going to do it again, pick up a little more color here. Turn my paper again, put it down, and roll the brush. See how it's sort of this jagged petal edge. More color, put the brush down, roll the brush. And you'll notice that every brush gives you a different effect. So try all different brushes. It's super fun. And I'll usually do 5 petals because a lot of flowers have 5 petals, but you can do more or less as you desire. So if there's some extra paint pooling, you can either leave that because this is meant to be very expressive, or you can dry your brush off and just wick a little bit up with the tip of your brush if you want to. So once that's done, I don't want to waste any time. I'm going to pick up some of my mimosa, the yellow color, put that on my brush, and I'm going to go inside, and because this is a small flower, I can just put some little dabs of this color kind of from the center moving out. Okay? And then to finish it, I think I'm going to use some wood violet just straight from the pan and put it in the center and let it touch that yellow and sort of spread out. Okay? So that is the most basic flower form. All right, that is the very most basic. It's this sort of ragged looking, beautiful, dreamy flower. All right? So that's one. So let's do another small one right next to it. And this time, let's use, I think I'll start with mimosa. So I'll get some mimosa on my brush, and I'm gonna go right next to this one and start at the edge and roll my brush. This color's a little juicier, so roll my brush, roll my brush, roll my brush, and just stop at the edge of that other flower. So they're sort of overlapping one another. And I think for the inside, I'm just going to use the wood violet. So I'll take a little wood violet, put in my palette, get a nice juicy mix on my brush, and start in the center and just touch it in the center and let that paint sort of whoosh out where it wants to. Okay? So very, very simple. And let's do one more. And this time, why don't we do some water rose, and let's mix a little mimosa into it so we get sort of a coral color. And we'll go right down here at the bottom, and we'll make a really small one. So 1, 2, 3, stop short of that flower. And we'll stick with the wood violet for the center. And just dab some in there. So that's sort of like a little flower sticking out at the bottom. So isn't that pretty? So this is the most basic form of these flowers, and I recommend that you just try a whole page using a smaller brush and just see what different color combinations work. Try to use a paint that has sort of a whoosh factor like wood violet or mimosa for the center. Certain blues in traditional watercolors will whoosh, okay? because that gives you that really dreamy effect where the colors just sort of blend together. So that is the flower in its most basic form, okay? So let's try one with a different brush. Let's try one, and remember, this is hot press watercolor paper. Every paper we use is going to have a different effect, all right? So I'm gonna turn my paper this way, and I'm gonna make a flower right here. So I think this time I'm gonna use Cienne Brulee, and I'm gonna mix it right into that coral color that I had mixed up. So I have kind of this warm brick red. And I'm gonna start here, put my brush down, roll my brush. Sometimes if the petal leaves some white space, that's fine. You can just leave it. A little bit more here. Start here, put the brush down, roll it. Again, start here, put the brush down, roll it. So you're getting this outer petal edge. Put the brush down. You can kind of overlap them sometimes, and some petals might stick out farther than the others. Roll it. And then one final petal, starting here, and roll it. So now I have a bigger flower. It's a little rounder. You notice that the edges aren't as kind of jagged as on the first one. So again, every brush you use is going to give a different effect, which is really cool. And then I think I'll use some ochre léger and just sort of dab it in using the tip of my brush all around, and then move it kind of toward the center. So I'm just dabbing it in like that. And it's okay if it leaves some marks, some blends and some doesn't, that's fine. And then I'll take a mix of Bleu Primaire and Wood Violet to get sort of a blue violet, and start in the center, put some paint down, it's a little too strong. Put some paint down and let it touch in places and let it whoosh, okay? So there's another one, that's a bigger one. Now, sometimes in these bigger flowers, once the petals are all down and you've got the whoosh factor going, you can go back in with some of your paint and you can add in some edges to your petals. Just put a little bit of darker color where the petals meet, and then rinse your brush and dry it off, and then soften that edge. Just to give the petals a little more definition. So over here I might put some right here where these two petals meet. Rinse my brush, dry it off, and then soften. Just sort of softening what I put down. So it's just giving the petals a little bit of definition. I'll do it again, a little bit of the color we used. I'm going to put some down here toward the base of the petal. Rinse my brush, dry it off, and soften. When I soften, I'm just blurring that edge to make the colors sort of melt together. See how it just gives it a little bit more definition, okay? So let's turn the paper again. I'm going to make one here. Same brush. This time I think I'll start with the Bleu Primaire. Get a nice puddle. Put my brush down. Roll it slowly. Okay, turn my paper. Make my petal a little higher. Roll it slowly. More paint on my brush. Put my brush down a little lower. Roll it slowly. Continue to turn my paper. A little bit higher. Roll my brush slowly. A little more paint. Put my brush down a little lower. Roll my brush slowly. A little higher. Roll my brush slowly. So this is more of a morning glory shape, right? It kind of reminds me of a morning glory. And in the center, I'm just going to pick up this mimosa and dab it in there. And then just barely touch it to the blue so it sort of spreads out. Then when this dries, I can put a deeper center in. Okay, so I'll just leave it to dry and then put a deeper center in the center. All right. So let's try the other brush, the Badger brush. And this time, I think I'll start with wood violet. Get a bunch of wood violet on my brush and put it down and roll it. So you're making these circular shapes. Roll it. See how the edges get kind of frayed looking with this brush? Pedal down, roll it all the way over to meet the other one. So a little bit of a different shape. I'm gonna turn my paper again. Sorry if that's making you dizzy. All right, and then I think I'll go back to my small brush and get a little bit more of the Bleu Primaire on my brush and start sort of halfway and roll it right on top. Just keep turning my paper. And the reason I'm turning my paper is just to make it easier for myself instead of doing my hand in an awkward position. So you notice that I'm working on these as they're still wet, right? Then I'll just dab a little bit because flowers get deeper toward their center, so I'm just dabbing a little bit toward the center there. Once that's done, then I think I'm going to take some Bois de Rose and dab that in the center. Just dab it and let it do what it's going to do. Okay, so you see we get all different kinds of flowers. Every single brush we use is going to turn out a little bit differently. Let me show you another brush. This one is by Branch and Brush. It's one of my favorites, and it's a handmade brush, and it's got kind of this long, stiff fiber. And so I'm going to do one right here using this brush. And I'm going to start with the Bois de Rose. Lots of water. And this one is very long and skinny, so it's going to even give a different effect. Turn my paper. Every brush will be a little different. So the more brushes you have, if you have a whole collection of brushes, get them all out and try them. There's a little less control with this one. Grab some wood violet, stick it in the center, let it touch here and there so you get that whoosh factor. Okay? Like a little hibiscus. And let's try one more. What would happen if we used a flat brush? This is a 1/2 inch flat brush. Let me turn my paper again. So let's try Bleu Primaire again. If I put a flat brush down and I just sort of roll it, I'll put a petal up higher. Just keep turning my paper. Beautiful. And then on this one, I think I'll put a little mimosa, and it will whoosh out to green. And then I'll let that dry, and I'll put a little bit of wood violet in the center, and then let that dry. So if we go back to some of the flowers that have dried, a little bit. So like this one here, the opposite of yellow is purple. So if I take some of my wood violet and I can just touch the center and paint a little bit of a darker center in there, and then clean my brush and dry it off and sort of pull out some like spokes on a wheel, or like sun rays coming out, just to give it a little bit of depth, right? I can do that over here as well. I can go to maybe raw umber and just put a touch in the center, just to give it some depth. All right, even over here on this one, I can go in the center and just put some little dots of raw umber, just to give it some depth, maybe one right here and one in there. So you can go back and add more. A little raw umber in there, a little raw umber in there. These aren't quite dry yet, but still the effect is wonderful, whether they're dry or not. Going into the center of this one, I think I'll use Crème Brûlée and just put little dots in the center. All different colors. We can also use gold mica and add some of that in there. Really pretty. Let's do gold mica in here. Okay, so these are very, very simple. They're very, very simple flowers, and they're not meant to look real, okay? But like this one, if I wanted to go back, I could take more wood violet, and where the petals meet, I could draw a little line. And then rinse my brush and dry it off, and just sort of soften that edge. This isn't totally dry, so the effect would be better if it dried. But you see, I can add dimension to my flower if I want to. Okay? So those are practice flowers. I want you to try that on a piece of watercolor paper, or hot press or cold press. Try both if you have them. And just practice that shape. Practice making little clusters of them. All right? So now we're going to go on and we're going to try the Strathmore watercolor postcard, which is a very different paper than the hot press paper. And this time I'm going to be a little more specific because maybe I want to send this out as a gift. And so let's see here. Easier to turn too, this smaller paper. So I think I'm going to start with the Bois de Rose. Make a little puddle of that. And I'm going to start sort of up here, and I'm going to put my brush down and roll it. Okay. Start again where that paint is really wet. Put my brush down and roll it. Put my brush down and roll it. Put my brush down and roll it. Put my brush down and roll it to meet the first petal. Okay, I'm going to dry my brush off and wick up a little bit of that extra paint. Okay, then I'm going to go into it with some mimosa, and I'm going to do little rolls toward the center. Just all the way around until they meet. All right. And then I'm going to take my brush, I'm going to soften it. I'm just going to pull the tip of my brush from the flat outside of the petal, sort of following the curve of the petal into that mimosa. See, I'm just taking the tip of my brush and just sort of flicking it around. And then for the center, I'm going to go back to that wood violet because I love the way it whooshes. And just touch it in the center and then use the tip of my brush to barely touch into the wet paint. And then the paint spreads. Okay? And now I'm going to put another one, and I'm going to do a darker water rose. I'll use more pigment on my brush. I'm going to start right next to it. Put my brush down and really roll it big. Put my brush down and really roll it big. Brush down. Really get that kind of loose. And then stop it right when I get here. And then I can just barely touch here if I need to fill in some space. Dry my brush off. Try to wick up any extra paint. Okay. And then right away, I'm going to go in this time also with Mimosa. Touch it to this, barely touch it, just kind of spread it out so it touches that wet paint and spreads a little where it wants to. And then just sort of flick into it to soften it. I love, see where the paints met and they just sort of did this random thing. Just softening. Then I'm going to go into it. I think I'm going to use raw umber, start in the center and just put some dots down, but let some of those dots touch the yellow paint so they just sort of mix and mingle a little bit. And this one's almost dry, so I'm going to go back in here and I'm going to add some raw umber to the center of that one too. Okay? And then I'm going to go over here, I'm going to do one more, and I think I'm going to start with Mimosa. I'm going to start up here and I'm going to put a mimosa petal, sort of a round one, just sort of scoop my brush round. Stop at this flower here. Just take your brush and sort of fill in. There. Rinse my brush and dry it off, and I can just lightly wick up anything extra, turn it into shading, you know, and filling in. And go back to that wood violet. Let it dance a little bit. That looks like a pansy. And then let that dry. So if we've made this little collection of flowers, then we can go back if we want to and we can paint some simple leaves. So I can grab my Viridian and mix it in with whatever mimosa is left over in my palette to warm it up a little bit. And I could paint some leaves, so I could just do some just expressive leaves coming out. And you might want to wait for this to dry if you don't want the leaves to mix and mingle with the flowers, but really, it's all good. And they can go right over the petals at times. Just drop the paint in and let the green dance around. It's fine. Maybe another one down here. Actually, I'll do one over here. And then just fill it in. Use the tip of the brush to sort of guide the paint around the flower petals. Draw your brush off, and then you can also just wick the tip of your brush through the center of these leaves to give them a vein if you want to. Really simple. And so as this dries, I can go back with maybe some raw umber and put a darker center in. And what I've noticed when I do this is some work better than others, you know, and so that's why practice is a really good thing. I'm not that crazy about how this wood violet has gone out to the edges, so I can always take a clean, dry brush and just wick it through where I want to soften it. And what that will do is it'll actually just make it look like a shadow between the petals. So you can always play more and do a little more. That's beautiful. I'm just taking a clean, damp brush and wicking it through. And I'll soften this edge as well. There. And then, just like with the other ones, I can always go back and make some darker edges if I wanted to separate the petals. So put a petal edge here, rinse my brush, dry it off, and soften. Okay, so that is another way to do this. Just do a little collage of flowers on a piece of Strathmore watercolor paper, and then you could write a little haiku or a little note to someone and send it off in the mail. Now, personally, I always like to add things with gold. So I would take my gold mica and just drop in some dots of gold mica here and there. Everything's always better with gold. All right, so that's another one. All right. So now that we kind of have an idea of how these work, I want to show you the difference on rice paper. And this is how I really love to make these. So I'm going to turn to this first page here. And I'm going to use a bigger brush. I'm going to use my Badger brush. And I'm going to start with, I'm going to make a mix. Let's see. I'm going to make a mix of Boada Rose in my palette. So I'm mixing it in this little dish, but you could also mix it on a plate. And then I'm going to put in some Mimosa just to warm it up a little bit. Nice orange color. And I'm going to start. Watch what happens. If I touch my brush down and I start to twist it, you see how it spreads? And it's sort of magical. Make a nice big flower here. This will be a 4-petal flower. I need a little bit more paint. And what happens is, so I'm just putting my brush down and rolling it until they meet, okay? So what happens is, as this dries and as it starts to spread and move, the colors tend to separate. The heavier parts of the pigment lay on top of the paper, they stay put. And the more fluid parts of the pigment that dissolve in water start to spread out. So you get this really beautiful, soft, hazy look to it. And I think I'm going to go straight for the gold mica. And I'm going to roll the gold mica on top. So the gold mica does not dissolve so well in waters because the pigment particles are bigger. And so it all just sits right on top and it gives this beautiful, beautiful effect. And then I would go right back to my gold mica again and I would do another one, starting inside of that one. See how I'm just turning my paper? So this is sort of like a camellia or something there. And then I could switch to a smaller brush and do even another swirl of gold mica inside. So I've got 3 layers of these golden petals. I hope it's coming across the way it is in person because it's really beautiful. And then once I get to the center, I want a deeper center because flowers always have that shadow in the center, right? So I think I'm going to use the Cienne Brûlée and drop it in the center and just sort of make a little circle with the tip of my paintbrush, dropping it in. So remember, the heavier pigment particles will stay put, and then we'll get this blush of color that moves out. So I don't know about you, but I find this really beautiful. All right, so let's just try another one down here. But this time we're going to start with some black ink. So I'm going to use this brush, a little bit bigger, and I'm going to just put a little bit of ink on my brush, and I'm going to make just keep going with my brush in a circle as well as I can. I can turn my paper. I'm getting this really ragged edge to my flower. Maybe a little more ink, and then I could there. Okay, so now I have this deep black ink on my brush, on my paper. Immediately after that, I can go for my smaller brush and maybe choose some water rose. Oops. And I can go right over the ink. See how the pigment lays on top of the ink? Turn my paper a little bit, continue to roll it, and fill that in. And then I'll take it one step further. I'm going to take my Cienne Brûlée, start inside the water rose, roll it around. Okay, and then I'm going to go for that gold mica again. So lift it on my, put some on my brush, and then I'm going to start kind of out here on the edge, and I'm just going to roll very delicately. More gold mica. Sorry about the turning of the paper, but it's just part of it. Okay. And then I'm going to go in the very center with some wood violet and just touch it in a little circle, just sort of dab it around. And that wood violet will spread a little bit. So wood violet, maybe one of the reasons it whooshes so much is that the pigment does not dissolve completely in the water, so it sort of stays put on the flower, okay? And I can even, I think I'm going to add a little more gold mica just to the very center, some little dots, okay? So that is another way you can do this. You can also take your ink and you can dilute it. So if you don't want such a dark black, you can add water to your black ink and it will make it more of a gray. Okay? So again, these are really, really beautiful. Really, really delicate. And again, this is rice paper. Very different from the watercolor paper. Okay? Now, the last one I want to show you is the origami postcards. And origami postcards come, they're sold at Jet Pens, and they're actually made out of rice paper, and they come in many different weights. This one is the orange. And you know what? I think I'm going to turn the video off for a second, grab a couple other kinds, and get some clean water for myself. Okay, so I have clean water now. And now we're going to use the Origami postcard. And again, this one is the orange version. I think there's 5 different versions, and I will link to those in the description box. So they're all different. They all react differently to the paint. And I'm going to start with the black ink. Actually, you know what? I'm going to try another ink. This is Robert Oster signature fountain pen ink in a color called Motor Oil. And I really love this one. So any color ink, again, is fine. I just want to demonstrate that. So I'm just putting the ink on the tip of my brush. And I'm just going to make one flower on this card. And I'll start here. And I'm just going to roll it. Make some petals for myself. Okay, grab a little more ink if I need to. And let those jagged edges happen, okay? I'm going to rinse my brush in one of the waters and just use some of the clean damp brush on my paint, and I'm just going to go just touch the inside edge of the flower petal, because what happens is inks will separate of all the colors that they're made from, and they'll start to spread. Okay, see how pretty that is? And then I'm going to add some of the water rose, put it in my palette, and I'm going to go in the center, and I'm just going to use the tip of my brush to sort of add some of this paint in the center. I don't want to totally cover up all the beautiful things that have happened, all right? So I'm just putting a little bit. Rinse my brush, and then I'm going to add a little bit of the wood violet in the very center, just a tiny bit. And then I'm going to switch to my smaller brush, put the cap back on my motor oil so I don't spill it. And while it's still wet, I'm going to grab that gold mica, put it in my palette so it's nice and fluid all over my brush. And I'm going to go around these dark petals and just sort of mimic what I did before. So putting my brush down, rolling it, putting my brush down, rolling it, putting my brush down. So pretty. Then take just a damp brush and roll it again all the way around, just to sort of soften that gold mica. Look how beautiful that is. So pretty, so pretty. Okay, so that is another example on the Origami postcard. This one does not have a bleed factor that's really high. Okay, so it bleeds a little bit, but mostly it stays put. The other thing I can do is take a damp brush and I can just sort of lightly touch where the petals meet, the edges of the petals, and then when that dries, it will give you a little bit more light there. All right, so we'll put that one aside and let it dry. And next I'm going to show you the green Origami postcard paper, which is has a little bit more of a bleed factor. So let's see here. So sometimes I ruin the packaging and it doesn't behave for me very well. This one's very heavy. All right, we're going to do the same thing. And this time, let's see. This time I think I'll use Pelican ink. This is called Smoky Quartz, Pelican Edelstein. So if you have a collection of inks, get them out. If you only have one, use that. If you only have paint, use paint. I just want to show you all different ways to approach this. So I'm getting some of that Smoky Quartz ink on my brush. And this time, instead of stopping between the petals, actually I will. I'm going to put my brush down and roll it. And just keep grabbing a little more ink as I need it. Put my brush down and roll it. Put my brush down, roll it. Put my brush down, roll it. Roll it. Rinse my brush in the one container. And then I think I'm going to take the Cienne Brulee, nice and juicy on my brush, and I'm going to go around the outside. And I'm going to start out here, and I'm going to roll it. And the ink will blend with the Cienne Brulee and spread a little bit. So I'm sort of just barely overlapping the two. Okay, a little bit more Cienne Brulee. Go all the way around. Some might be darker, some might be lighter, doesn't matter. But look how beautiful that is, it's so pretty. And then on the inside, I think I'm going to use Ochre Léger. And just lightly overlap it. Okay? And then on the very inside, I want it to be darker, so I'm going to go back to my Cienne Brulee, and I'm just going to dab in little dots of Cienne Brulee on the inside, just sort of putting it down so the color will spread, okay? Then I'm going to go back to my gold mica, and this time I'm going to make a little puddle of gold mica in my palette so it's nice and fluid. Get it on my brush, and then I'm going to dry my brush off a little bit. And I'm going to start just where the Ochre Léger starts to meet. So it's very, very sheer, okay? This time I added water to it. And I'm just going around with this delicate sheer veil of the gold mica. There. So beautiful. You could even go again around the edge of here if you wanted to, but I'm so happy with this. I just want to leave it the way it is. But I might put a tiny bit of gold mica, just little tiny dots on the inside, like the stamens. There. Not stamens. What are those called? Anthers or pistils. Okay, so again, this paper reacts totally different. This is probably my favorite, the green origami postcard. But I'll take a picture of this one. But look how beautiful that is. Starting with the brown ink, adding some Cienne Brulee, adding some yellow ochre, Ochre Léger, a little more Cienne Brulee, and then that beautiful sheer veil of the gold mica. It's absolutely gorgeous. All right, so that is the technique. All different kinds of papers, all different kinds of paints and inks, all different kinds of brushes. The key is get out your supplies, use whatever you have, and just experiment. And I guarantee you, you will find some beautiful results with these. Super, super fun. It does take a little practice to get that rolling technique, okay? And remember, the tip of your brush is pointed away from you and you roll it. All right, try everything you have and see what you come up with. I hope you'll tag me on social media so I can see. And that completes our Artist for Everyone project today. I hope you enjoyed it. And I also want to mention again that I have a Patreon account now. And I have a Patreon virtual classroom, and it is just so much fun so far. We've had a lot of content, a lot of communication between all of the participants. It's really wonderful. It is $5 a month, and you get quite a lot of content for that. So about $1.25 a week, and even less than that when there are 5 weeks in a month. So I will also leave a link for my Patreon, and I hope you'll check it out. If you have any questions about it, please ask me. And there isn't really a risk, because if you join, you pay the $5, and after a few weeks or a month it's not for you, then you can unsubscribe. That's not a problem. But I hope you'll stay, and I think you'll really enjoy it. So anyways, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you're having a wonderful day wherever you are, and I will see you next week for a dandelion lesson. Thanks so much, everybody. Take care.